Good morning, everybody. What is up, and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Untold Crimes and Crimes Untold. If you're watching on YouTube, this is Crimes Untold. If you are listening over on Spotify, this is Untold Crimes. Today, we're going to be talking about quite a doozy of a case, but first, has everybody been following the issues with the Conjuring House? It is messed up beyond belief, like messed up. Also, I know you can see my cat back there. She is if you're watching on YouTube. Um, yeah, she's been a crazy mess this morning, but the stuff with the Conjuring House is fucked up on many levels. Like every allegation that's come out against the new owner versus the old owners, all of the employees that just quit this year because of how it's just crazy. I was watching the live broadcast on Jason Hawes' channel that came out Friday night, and it had everybody in it. I think they were all in like a chat or whatever, a Zoom meeting, and each one of them spoke about the different things like the fire in the barn, how people aren't getting repaid for the things that they lost in the fire, and how they were treated like it's all messed up. What do you guys think about that? Comment about it below because it's all messed up on multiple levels. Like, yeah, crazy. Today's case is actually an old, like a super old case, like a older case. We're going to be talking about the murder of Pearl Bryan. Now, Pearl Bryan's murder happened back in 1896. 1896. So back on February 1st of 1896, there was a teenage farmhand. His name was Johnny Hewling. There's different variations of his last name. Hewing, Hoeing, Holing. Depending on the source material, you're going to get different spelling and variations, but I'm just going to say Johnny Hewling. So Johnny Hewling found the body of a woman in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. The body was found in a field that resided at the corner of Alexandria Pike and Highland Ave, and this was on a foggy, cold morning. So at first he just thought that this woman was drunk, but would end up going to his work and told his employer about what he found. So his employer then would inform the deputy sheriff about it. The deputy sheriff then went onto the scene and found that of a dead woman. This body had multiple wounds on her hands and her back, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the fact that she was indeed 5 months pregnant, and that she was alive when she was decapitated. Her decapitation was below her fifth vertebra, and this was a very gruesome murder. And it gained such notoriety because of it, because of how gruesome it was. So the determination that she was alive during her decapitation was determined by the coroner, Bob Tingley, that conducted her autopsy at the scene of the crime. This coroner also confirmed that there was trace evidence of cocaine in her stomach contents at the time of her death. As he was on the scene, he also found a pool of blood at her feet with the indication marks that there was a struggle and she was face down. Or, respectfully speaking, she was chest down because she was, decapitated. But where was her head? Her head was not at the scene. Oh no. This female was determined to be that of 22-year-old Sunday school teacher Pearl Bryan from Greencastle, Indiana. She was the daughter of Alexander S. and Susan Jane Bryan, who were well known in Greencastle, Indiana. He was a wealthy businessman, and she was one of many children born to this prosperous family. Her identification was made due to the shoes that she was wearing. You see, the shoes she was wearing were custom made that were from her hometown of Greencastle, Indiana. And there was only two women in particular that had the same size shoes that she was wearing. One woman was still alive, and the other one was Pearl Bryan. Pearl Bryan obviously wasn't at home because she had gone to Cincinnati to see a friend. That's what she told her family, or what came out. Since she came from a well-respected family at the time of her murder, it was all over the place, all over news articles, everywhere. And also in the articles, that's when it came up that she left home on January 28th of 1896, which was 3 days prior to her death, and it was believed that she went to Cincinnati to visit a friend. But rumors would come out stating that she actually went to Cincinnati in hopes of marrying the man that had indeed impregnated her. Who was she visiting? Was it the person who impregnated her? The day following the discovery of her body, there was a letter from her cousin. His name is Will Wood, and this letter is one that he sent to Scott Jackson about the discovery of Pearl's pregnancy. The following evening, Scott Jackson, who I will talk to you about in a few seconds, was arrested along with Alonzo M. Walling. He was arrested as well. You see, Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling were roommates and students at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery. Who is Scott Jackson, you may ask? Scott Jackson is a 28-year-old Maine native who was normal height, had cold gray eyes, and blonde hair. He was the mastermind, per what came out during his trial, and it is said that he met Pearl back in 1893 when he was going to visit his mother. Pearl was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and a pretty country girl who was a Sunday school teacher and was very outgoing. So of course this caught his eye. They then were officially introduced by her cousin, Will Woods, who I have aforementioned, and they would become close. So close that there would be a distinct change in the relationship in the summer of 1895. Post this is when she would find out something. I'm assuming her pregnancy. The initial change, obviously, that happened in the summer of 1895. Based on gestation, I would assume her pregnancy would have started in August of 1895. So, right before Scott Jackson would have had to leave to go to college in Cincinnati. It has also been discussed that she talked to her cousin Will Woods about what happened and that he wrote to Scott Jackson, which is the letter that they found. He then would receive correspondence back from Scott Jackson stating that Pearl needed to come to Cincinnati. I'm assuming once Pearl heard this, she was elated that she would be made a good woman by Scott wanting to marry her post arriving, but that is all but what happened. So apparently at the trial for Scott Jackson, it came out that he was having a secret relationship with Pearl for several months, and allegedly on the day of the murder, the men were drinking at a saloon in Cincinnati with Pearl, and they put cocaine in her drink. They then decided to murder her. So once Pearl was incapacitated, she would be taken to a field in Fort Thomas where they would decapitate her. They do not know what happened to her head. There's multiple statements as to the differing places as to where her head is, but has never been found. The waterworks of Covington actually drained parts of the Ohio River in efforts to find her head, but it has never been found. There is also another possibility that they took her head and put it in the furnace at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery and burned it there, hence why they were never able to find it. Alonzo Walling also told the police that he was asked to perform an illegal abortion on Pearl, post figuring out or finding out that she was indeed pregnant. But by the time she went to Cincinnati, she was already 5 months pregnant, so that would be a second trimester abortion. This baby is already big enough, has a heartbeat, so it would not go so well, but I'm not going to discuss on that. So, because Scott Jackson asked Walling to perform a abortion on Pearl, Walling was very hesitant, and this is what caused Jackson to talk to him that they needed to poison her and make it look like a potential suicide. Hence the cocaine. So, if you have a good amount of cocaine mixed with alcohol, it will cause you to overdose, hence a suicide. But it seems that that did not work, hence why there was a struggle and she was decapitated. Both of these men were indicted on the charges of first-degree murder on February 13th of 1896. While the search for her head and the police pushing them to relay the information raged on in regards to where her head was. Scott Jackson's trial was from April 21st to May 14th of 1896, and Alonzo Walling's trial lasted from May 26th to June 18th of 1896. Both of these men were found guilty of first-degree murder, and they were indeed sentenced to death. Both of them were able to delay the inevitable, delay their executions, until March 20th of 1897. They were hung behind the Newport Campbell County Courthouse that was on York Street. Apparently, this morning, it was a perfect spring day, from what the news articles state. Initially, both of the men survived the drop in the gallows. So after they were put on the noose, obviously they're dropped through a trap door. Both of them survived the drop, but eventually would strangle to death via the rope around their necks within minutes of this failed drop. To this day, they are the last people that were executed by hanging in Newport, and the gallows were torn down following this botched execution. Her head has never been found, still to this day, which is now 128 years later. Currently still, people lay a penny heads up on her tombstone so that she won't rise headless when she is resurrected on Resurrection Day. If you aren't religious, please don't get offended by that. Pearl Bryan's family was devoutly religious, hence why people that go to her headstone in the cemetery where she's buried, which I actually did not. She's buried at Forest Hill Cemetery, which is on 2181 South Country Road or County Road, 50 West. Um, don't get offended by that. She came from a devoutly religious household, so that is a norm for people that still feel connected to her case, still feel connected that we might find out exactly what happened to her, and that when she is resurrected, she will have her head again, like that she's whole. Don't get offended by it if you don't follow that. There's also a lot of controversy when it comes to her case as well. There is talk, the famous Bob Mackey's haunted place. There's talks that her spirit actually haunts this place. So I'm sure many people know of like ghost adventures and the most terrifying places in America in other sorts of paranormal media sources or shows or anything like that that happen on the Discovery Channel or on the Travel Channel. So during an episode of said Ghost Adventures show, they explore Bob Mackey's Music World, which is a highly active supernatural nightclub or like a nightclub or honky tonk club that's in Wilder, Kentucky. And there's legends that, or it's thought that Pearl actually contacted them via an ovulus. So, an ovulus is basically a speaker box in which a spirit can use the frequencies in order to talk to the living. And it's said that Pearl was talking to them through the ovulus. And also the spirit of Scott Jackson, in that he confessed to her murder. There's no way for them to actually like put two and two together that maybe, yes, maybe his spirit has gone there. Maybe Scott Jackson was actually at the Bob Mackey's honky tonk at one point, but I don't believe that building. I don't even actually know how old this building is. Now, if it has been, there since the 1890s, then yes, maybe. Or maybe Scott Jackson roamed the actual like land that it was on. There's a lot of times paranormal activity. It can be related to spirits that are tied to the actual land itself. So that could be a possibility. But then again, we don't always know. Now, it's it's one of those things where it's just like, is that really what happened? Do we actually know that's what happened? Because there's a lot of things that can be debunked now, and I'm not saying that they're frauds. I'm not saying that anybody else is frauds. Don't come at me, paranormal world. Sometimes things are made and portrayed to look a certain way, and they're not actually that certain way. So you have to kind of take things with a grain of salt. So let's talk a little bit more about the crime scene, shall we? Her body was found 200 feet off the Alexandria Turnpike and less than 2 miles from an abandoned slaughterhouse. Obviously, her head has never been found. Apparently, there were signs on her body due to this, obviously, the blood, that they had tried to use dental tools, induce an abortion, but this was botched. And because they had a frightened and injured woman on their hands, that's when things take a turn for the worst. That's when they sever her head from her body with dental instruments. Apparently, it was a clean cut, as to what the coroner said, but even with this, she was still alive while this was a clean cut. So clearly, the cocaine and the alcohol did a lot to make sure she was fully incapacitated, but she was still breathing. After they, sever her head, we don't know what they did with her head. We just know that they left the crime scene, just left her there. During Jackson's trial, Walling testified against him that the idea of to cut Pearl up and get rid of her body was Jackson's idea, and they were going to put her in the sewers. But only her head was severed from her body. You see, they also found some of Pearl's hair that was in a valise in Scott Jackson's room, which I find very odd. But then again, most serial killers or killers keep a trophy. No, valise is a small traveling type bag or like a suitcase. So that would make sense as to why he would have some of her things. But also the fact that they had somewhat of a relationship, that would also make sense as to why he would have some of her things. So I actually just found a article, or well, it's not really an article, but it's called The Legend of Pearl Bryan's Murder, and this is from a book. It's from Troy Taylor's book, No Rest for the Wicked, or like excerpts from it. I will put the link in my description box. If you're listening over on Spotify, it will be in the show notes. So apparently, where the nightclub is now located, obviously has a long and bloody history dating back to the slaughterhouse that was there. And it also is linked to many ghost stories in southern Indiana. It was constructed back in the 1850s and was one of the largest packing houses in the region. It was closed down in the early 1890s, but the legend has it that this building wasn't abandoned. The basement of the packing house apparently was a site for rituals by occultists, and it was used to hide remains of animals that were butchered in these ceremonies. Also, apparently, this is um, where is it? Where? I just saw it. Man, well, shit. Oh, a small satanic group, apparently, of residents that were local to the area would go to the building and gather, and they would practice in secret. In 1896, apparently, they were exposed during a trial, and this was one of the most spectacular murder trials held in northeast Kentucky. It was so large that there was also tickets sold, and there was more than 5,000 people outside of Newport, Kentucky. I'm sure you understand which trial we are discussing in reference to that. It is that of the Pearl Bryan murder trial, the one against Scott Jackson. So, this trial in the murder itself, kind of like, you know how things just evolve and evolve and evolve. Apparently, it became a part of the Bob Mackey's music world building history because of it. And in this as well, it talks about how she was seduced. And apparently, in this, it says that Will Wood is her boyfriend. So, this kind of like excerpt says that William Wood is her boyfriend, who's actually the son of a Methodist minister, and that he didn't know what to do because he found out that Pearl was pregnant, and that Pearl was convinced that she needed to have an abortion. This is when Will got in contact with Scott Jackson, who was going to the Ohio College of Dental Surgery, and Jackson apparently was a member of the occult group, the Satanic group, at the former slaughterhouse, which was, not far from where Pearl's body was found. Because of Scott Jackson's skills, apparently he let um, this made Will Wood think that he'd be able to, perform an abortion. Apparently no, because he tried to use chemicals, including cocaine. That didn't work. And this is why it was found in her system. And then he tried to use the dental tools that he had, but then it became botched. And this is when, after about an hour, they became frightened and they had the injured woman on their hands. And that's when it takes a dark turn. They then severed her head. But why? But why? This is a very strange and bizarre kind of retelling of the story, which I don't really know. Apparently, there's different stories that have been spread across this area since this ensued, is that they were suffering from the wrath of Satan, and if they revealed the actual location of Pearl's head, then they would suffer that indeed wrath of Satan. The slaughterhouse that was close to this location has been like guarded since, and because other occultists apparently go there, um, they threatened Scott Jackson and Alonzo Walling that if they talked about this, then they would expose them. Apparently, there's a reporter that released articles stating that as the noose was put on Alonzo Walling's head, it he threatened to come back and haunt everyone after he died. This same person, just a few days later, wrote in a Kentucky Post newspaper article that an evil eye had then fallen on many people that were closely connected to the Pearl Bryan case. There's still legend till this day, still the fact that they believe many people involved in this case had bad luck and all ended with tragic ends to their life, which include the police and many attorneys that were involved with this case. And the biggest thing that I haven't even told you guys is that the top of her body was actually covered by her dress, her blue dress. Um, yeah, they maybe because they didn't feel comfortable enough, they covered her face. So that everybody is the murder of Pearl Bryan and the craziness that involves it, that with the, Bob Mackey extravaganzas, the paranormal, all of the above. So I hope you guys enjoyed, whether you're watching over on YouTube or listening over on Spotify, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye, guys.